This is TWiT.
Rack mount Mac Pro. Are you excited?
Oh, yeah.
The Rack Pro.
The Rack Pro.
Alex, I'm pretty sure you're the one that's going to be getting some of those, right?
Eventually.
$500 more,
Let 'em sort
right?
this out. Yeah, but it's, I mean, it just makes so much sense. There's so many places if you're
You
building
save the
into a
money on
server-
wheels.
Yeah, exactly.
But you spend it on the wheel. The wheels are on the side now.
I mean, the main thing is all of us wanted to be able to do this with, and some people actually did it with the old cheese graters where they'd cut the ears off and put them in and.
But they did have Xserve. They did have a rack mount Macintosh for years.
A single, yeah, but it wasn't nearly as
Not this,
extensible
obviously.
as this, and it wasn't like a real. I don't know, it wasn't really a real computer to this level. Like this is something that you can wire into a mainframe, and not in a mainframe, but into a server room. You can put a bunch of these in a server room. And if you think about like a lot of visual effects firms and a lot of graphics firms will have all the computers in a nice, cool room somewhere else, and then they just pipe everything, and you just have a monitor and a keyboard, and you're working. And so that's why these rack mounts make a lot more sense.
They have
for them.
rails, so they slide right into the standard rack. How many U's?
That's probably what
is
you're
this?
paying extra.
3U, 5U?
It looks like 6.
6U?
I mean, I don't know for sure, but when I look at it from me just glancing at it, I would say either 6 or 8U.
It's interesting that after killing the Xserve, Apple's kind of acknowledging that that there's a business here. You know, that this is something. I like it. The switches on the side and it has handles so you can pull it out.
I think Apple had this issue where there was going to be there's already a large portion of the industry that left Apple because the old Mac Pro, the
you
trash
couldn't put
can.
the trash can in a. I guess people tried to rack
They did.
it.
They
but
put
it's
3 of them
dopey.
in
like
this
in a
big
wine
rack,
cellar or something.
It was it was a little weird, and then it's hard to get to, and it wasn't really built for that configuration. And the issue is that Apple started losing a lot of people. Where people are going to Premiere, they're going to other things. They're going to because the Mac Pro, the trash can, wasn't scalable and it wasn't giving people what they needed to do really heavy work. And so the problem is that you start losing brain trust at that point. I don't know whether it's really you make that much money on it, but you do start losing people who you don't want to necessarily lose as far as the ecosystem goes. So I think it's important that they built something that, and now it's almost infinitely scalable. So now you can put in as much as you want. If you're an R&D, I mean, there is definitely some number crunching that being able to put 1.5 terabytes of RAM into it makes sense. And
that'll be cheaper like next year and the year after. And the way a lot of people were upset with the initial starting price, but that's basically just the container unit you're buying. And then you can upgrade and add new parts, exactly like you said, modularly for years and years to come. I saw a couple of people who work with AK were talking about it, and they bought about midline specs, but they imagine within 2 years what they have then will be now top line specs, but there'll be even more room to add more terabytes and more RAM and more stuff on top of it. So it's like a 10-year investment for them just in the system.
It's a 5U unit. According to Apple.
There you go.
So look at that, baby. Man, that's pretty. That's pretty. Up to 1.5 terabyte of DDR4 ECC RAM. Of course, you can upgrade the RAM yourself because the user accessible DIMM slots. Yay!
Yeah.
Graphics.
Almost everything. Like people are putting the most remarkable, well, at least testing the most remarkable things in
Is
there.
there some way of if you had rack-mounted interlinking, the rack-mounted to make a render farm of some kind?
Well, you'd have a control unit that's sending those renders out. I mean, that's typically what happens is you have a whole bunch of machines
that are
working.
You don't have to treat it as a single unit. You can just say, hey, it's
it just
machine 1 you do that, machine 2 you do that.
Yeah, you break it up, and it just depends on what calculation has to be done based on whether it can be done in parallel or in series.
Well, if you're going to get a micro LED 8K TV, you're probably going to want to make sure your production company has a Mac Pro to feed it the 8K content.
I have a feeling they're going to make about as many as they can. They're going to sell about as many as they can make for quite some time.
Their timing's good because I think 8K is. I mean, people are looking at 8K content production.
Yeah,
and you need this.
Isn't that the basketball players' TV? That was the old joke. It's like whatever the highest end TV is, it sells mostly to it sells mostly to athletes.
Yeah, I don't think it's athletes that are buying Mac Pros.
Well, also if you're thinking about VR,
they can afford it, but they're not buying them.
If you're thinking about VR is incredibly large files because oftentimes we're rendering everything you have to see all the way around.
You were showing me that Angkor Wat.
And that's
temple
and that took that takes my little iMac. It took it half an hour to build the model. And that's just one little piece.
Right.
Now we saw what Justine's.
She was building.
She was talking about the fact that I think on TWiT. I think when we were doing TWiT, that she was having trouble figuring out what can you slam the.
How
and I was like, I have
it.
something.
How to peg it?
So we pegged it. But even then, she was still editing 8K on it while she was, while it was doing all these calculations. But all 28 cores were fully utilized.
A lot of headroom in this.
I believe it's public knowledge now, but Dr. Wave is on the Pro Workflow team from Pixar, who's just the most amazing individual. Really, really into AR and all these things. And he was showing Toy Story, I think it was Toy Story 4, whatever the latest one is, and he's like, this is a scene with Woody, then you pull back and this is the room, and then you pull back and this is the fair, and then you pull back and this is the world, and like he's just throwing it around like in real time, like it's nobody's business. And he said, yep, it's all ported to AMD now and it works great on the Mac Pro, and just more polygons than I've ever seen on a screen before.
I wonder if Apple's thought about, AMD announced some really heavy-duty chips at CES, including a Threadripper with 64 cores for a mere $4,000. Nothing Intel could come even close to. I wonder if Apple has thought about putting AMD.
They're so customized for Intel. Like there's two things. one is that their stuff is they work very closely with Intel. They do that with AMD for graphics chips, but like everything from PowerNap to the way that they handle security, from the T2 chip into the Intel structure, and also the single-threaded stuff that Intel does for a lot of people is still a primary workload. They're not that many people are multi-core yet, so you'd have to divide.
Oh no, but AMD's got better, faster single-core processor as well. That's the point, is that you're not giving up your single-core speed.
I haven't heard that from the gamers. I've heard mostly from the multi-core people, like the video workflows that AMD.
I thought
is
gamers
way better,
loved
but not
the
for
AMDs.
For the CPU, maybe. The last few that I heard, it was mostly like for video professionals. Like, I would love it. I personally would be so into that so quickly.
Yeah.
But I just heard from a lot of people who do. It was like, okay, sit down, creative. Here's what I do and why I'm just fine.
Well, and so much of the calculations now are sitting on the GPU as well. So a lot of that, or they can be interchangeable. I think that in the grand scheme of things, I wouldn't expect the difference between those two processors to. I mean, I'm sure it's going to increase the speed, but I don't think it's going to be like double the speed of the machine because you put the faster processor in, because there's all the subsystems, there's the GPUs, and there's a lot of other things that can be added to. So I'm thinking more of a 10 or 20%.
I think for a long time AMD's single core was not as good, but I think that's kind of the part of the story of these new Ryzen chips, is that their single core performance is also improving.
Yeah,
and of course certainly cost per core is well below Intel's.
And they're per watt because they're down to 7 nanometers, and Intel still
that's right,
hasn't gone down. And 10 nanometer for Intel is about the same as 7 nanometer for Taiwan Semiconductor. Those are marketing names now, not actual sizes anymore.
Yeah.
But they're still so far ahead that there's.
So
I would
Alex,
love AMD on so many levels.
You couldn't use a 64. Wouldn't a 64 core processor be better for you? Oh yeah, I thought you.
I'm saying no, but when I look at like I
I thought you could.
Yeah. So I could use all the process.
Mm-hmm. Just because Apple has locked itself into Intel doesn't mean. Especially since they do work with AMD, that they couldn't at some point.
No, but I think that beyond the spec, it's easy to look at the spec, but it's also like, how does it handle heat? How does it handle, like for instance.
I think it's like, I don't know what the TPU is. I think it's like 750 watts or something. The thing is like a little heater.
But we don't know, like, what does it take to actually, as far as that goes, do you have to liquid cool it to get the full performance?
Apple's doing something in there. Well, I'm seeing a lot of enthusiasts building Threadripper gaming machines and other kinds of machines.
I have a Threadripper in the PC that I have.
Yeah.
And
do you like it?
Oh yeah, it's great. It's fast. It's but it's liquid cooled, and it's got a lot of other things that are built to it, so that I couldn't necessarily do in a Mac Pro to get the full performance out of that. And I think that the issue is that there's a lot of other things other than just the specs that are going to make a difference. For instance, a good example is my little iMac. If I put that project that I gave Justine, if I put that project into it, it'll run for 2 days, and then the iMac will restart. Like it doesn't.
I can't handle it.
I kept on when I was going on trips. I'd put the project into it, and then I'd go on the trip, and I'd come back, and nothing had happened. And I'm like, I don't understand. It was running when I left, and I realized that it was. And I finally did this thing where it saves along the steps, and I finally figured out what was happening was it was just getting to one part, and then just thumping the computer. Not even kind of like a little like it crashes the app. The computer just stopped working. And I finally believe that it's because I was getting into outside the heat, so if it turns out if you run the CPU for 2 days straight at its full maximum, it's more than it was designed
It'll gate,
for.
right? It'll gate.
But it could win the 24-hour of Le Mans.
Yeah, exactly.
If it wanted to.
Yeah, exactly.
Leave some Jiffy pop on the top of it. If you see it's pop, that you know that okay, something must have happened.
I stand corrected. Expert in our chat room says the Threadripper 3990X is a 240 watt TDP. A mere 240 watt TDP.
That's a lot of watt.
That's a lot of watt, and of course, a lot of watts means a lot of heat.
Right, and again, I think that there's a lot of calculations into what chip is getting used beyond how many cores and what the raw speed is. It's all how does it affect the environment? How do you put it in?
But there's also no meltdown, right, on AMD CPUs, from what I can remember, which is nice.
Right.
So many good aspects.
Well, all right. So the question was, you think at any point Apple might go AMD?
What about ARM on the mobile and AMD on the higher end?
Yeah.
I don't think number one, I don't think Apple will go to. I don't think that they care enough about that chipset to.
It's not. There's so much other stuff that's not.
This is not a. I don't think this
important.
This is a hill they want to fight a battle on, and then I think that it'll be Intel into the future because this is not something they want to shift, but I think that all our mobile platforms will end up in ARM. So I think that our MacBook Pro. But everything below the MacBook Pro, I think, is going to end up in ARM within the next 5 years.
Well, that's when Pro, non-Pro kind of makes it a little more sense. You have a distinction with the Pros are Intel's,
right?
The rest are ARM. It makes a little bit more sense.